as somebody who is in the NHI IAM space, I was shocked when I saw that 60% or above 60% of, for both private and public companies, CISOs say that the IAM is their focus or their role. I say shocking because I think all my peers, all our peers, colleagues who I go talk about this topic, they've been lying to me.
The Adversarial Podcast. Why you gotta be so adversarial? Adversarial. It's time to get adversarial.
Welcome back to the Adversarial Podcast. Good to see you guys, Mario and Sunil. We've got a bunch of topics to go through as usual. Last episode, which was 2 weeks ago, we got some interesting reactions from some of the topics that we did that were super CISO-centric, right? And I think a layperson would think all of our topics are CISO-centric, but in reality, some of them are more engineer-centric, I think. We're going to try to stick with that and keep mixing that in. So we got a few of those.
I think we also got a complaint that the Midwestern CISOs are underrepresented here.
Oh, yeah. The East Coast, West Coast thing. Somebody said the conclusion is that Midwestern CISOs are where it's at.
That's right.
So speaking of CISOs, first topic here, the annual Hitch Partners survey of CISOs came out. I think a lot of us usually at least speed read that and go through and pay some attention each year. The biggest takeaway for me looking at this was that there wasn't anything major changing this year. I thought it was, that's okay. I'm glad that they're still publishing it and not trying to over dramatize it. The comp was up a little bit. Did that catch your eyes, guys? Do you think this has anything, before we go into the makeup of the job market and all that and the roles, does this tell you anything for our CISO friends about the macro job market?
From a public company perspective, publicly traded companies, there was a year-over-year 6.1% compensation increase from the previous year. I thought that was pretty big, but that was overall compensation. That included bonuses and also, I'm assuming, RSUs as well. On the other side, the private companies and non-public companies was a 1.7% increase. But traditionally, you're dealing more with ISOs in private companies, depending on the stage, and certainly RSUs later. But you can't do much with those ISOs, not unless you're allowed to sell in private markets. So it was mostly more on your paycheck, your compensation with that bonus. And that was more was kind of shocking, 1.7%. But you're in a private company, you're looking for ISOs, right? That's really what we're putting our money on it.
Yeah, and I think 1.7 is certainly, well, I don't know what the actual inflation rate was for last year, but it was high enough that it swayed certain elections, right? And the other consideration, I guess, on the public side, if the public company CISOs, their salaries increased by 6%, I think part of the question I would have is, what's the base rate, or what's the base rate for other senior leaders inside of a public organization? Was that the same, better, worse? I think having a sort of comparison across other C-level executives would be helpful here.
Yeah, the way I interpret this is stock prices. To Mario's point, the private companies don't have valuations on liquidity. Those equity portions of the compensation can't be marked to market as readily. The public company CISOs, that piece of their comp, they know exactly what it was worth. If it's RSUs, it could be taxed like ordinary income even. So at 6.1% in a really bustling market, to me, that's not that great. Ties out with my anecdotal observations of more and more people that are telling me they're on the market. I still think there's more and more CISOs looking for jobs now than I hear about opportunities all the time. But
I do like what you said, Jerry, on the, if you look at the 6.1, and if that includes RSUs, well, the NASDAQ did really well last year. I kind of doing less than the NASDAQ if you look at the numbers from last year. My wealth management team went over my wealth management report, we all might go through this from last year, and they look like winners. I looked like a winner last year. Now let's see what happened this year.
Hey, another thing buried away in here, though. So like part of the survey, Composite, was about roles and what reports to a CISO and what's in and what's out and all that kind of thing. I always think that a big trend has been IT rolling up under CISOs. We might have talked about that before, but that's like kind of a dark horse trend that I think is coming up more and more. Anything else in here that caught your eye?
Well, the whole point about the IT rolling up under a CISO is because we see the function of the CIO. Like, what is the function of the CIO when you largely operate SaaS? Okay. You're starting to see an eroding of a traditional CIO responsibilities when more and more things are moving off-prem. Anyway, so I think that's going to back to the survey. I think that's also why we see this increase in responsibilities around, like, let's say, cloud security or SaaS security type of things. That's what you should expect.
I think for public companies, maybe private as well, and they're kind of in the same range, that CISOs are reporting to the CIO an average of 40 to 45% of the respondents. Now, I don't know if it was all for private, but I know it was for public, at least, which might add to what you're saying, Sunil.
What about IAM in here? Anything catch your eye there?
60% of CISOs own IAM functions. I don't know how to interpret this as either a land grab or if that's really truly what their responsibilities are incorporating. So part of the question is, what exactly do we mean by IAM? If the general mantra in security nowadays is identity is the new perimeter and that's how you get budget, then sure, I'll own IAM, maybe just some part of it, right? But what does that mean? Are they administrating like Okta, internally, or are they owning that as a function, or are they owning customer IAM, which is a whole nother bailiwick as well? So I think the notion of IAM as a category may be growing because it is where a lot of attacks are emerging, but it's also potentially where you get more budget.
To my observation, I for one, audit has been myopically focused on, I would say, on identity. I mean, everybody's saying identity is a new perimeter, it's all new, but Deloitte was issuing a ton of findings about not terminating old DBA accounts 25 years ago. Like, that was all they could do, right? It's easy. You get the HR list and you get the thing from the DBA, and then it was easy. And I don't think it was super important or effective. I think it was kind of like the microcosm of BitSite in the audit world in the past. So that drove to me this massive arms race and spend of, we need to get, it is in a Fortune operations, right? Where you're Fortune 500. You got hundreds of apps that have come through acquisition. And I'm talking about, a Sybase app that has a table of usernames and passwords, right? No integration, all these disparate. And you got Big Four banging on your door that you haven't terminated everybody in those. Who cares? No one can access them or log in anyway. It's a waste of time. But we're spun up on it. It's going up to the board. The board's seeing the report. How are we going to get our terminations back on track? And before you know it, to me, IAM is everybody hiring 150 people to corral all the old apps and get them on SSO and unified one-click termination out of all the legacy apps, which, again, never stops ransomware, never stops data theft. I mean, it has nothing to do with cyber anymore. So I think, and like companies like SailPoint are just eating it alive, right? And in my experience, they're never done, because by the time because everybody's saying, oh, don't do the Sybase app because it's going to be deprecated in 3 months anyway. And of course, it's around for years. And then by the time you finally do get it done, there's 6 more that come in with the latest acquisition. So I think it's Sisyphean and not really important, the IAM investments most people are making.
I don't think it's a question of do we invest in fixing the Sybase app. I think the question is there a systemic issue that results in things like that Sybase app, right? And I at the end of the day, you're right, I could care less about the Sybase app, and okay, so you got us on this, but is it a systemic issue that appears in many other places, such that that the auditor feels like we don't have proper governance around IAM, such that I don't have confidence that you're doing this right for other more critical apps?
As somebody who is in the NHI IAM space, I was shocked when I saw this. And the first thing, like 60% or above 60% for both private and public companies, CISOs say that the IAM is their focus or their role or their oversight. They own that space. I say shocking because I think all my peers or our peers, colleagues who I go talk about this topic, they've been lying to me for months. Right? Because they're like, oh yeah, I do IGA, but I'm not managing access. I'm not managing people's identities access. No, that's not me. Go talk to go to the DevOps team.
Yeah. I mean, identity is 2 halves to it to me too, right? There's provisioning and deprovisioning, which
Right.
is used to be the IT help desk, and it was, okay, I'm going to create your account. I personally think IT should do that because it's a get up in the middle of the night type call, which means it's a make sure you have 24/7 coverage and all that kind of stuff. And then there's engineering, which was let's get all the connectors, all the legacy apps, so we have one-click termination so that we do better on the audit this year. But those are the two halves of IAM. So where does migrate our non-human identities to be context aware so that there's not static creds you could use from somewhere else? Where does that fit in? Nowhere. No one cares about that in IAM. And where does deploy passkeys into our customer-facing apps? Let's get that in there. No, nowhere. So I don't know. I think most of the IAM spend is kind of, if it all went away tomorrow, wouldn't really move the needle on security.
Here's my other question: is if we own 60%, if 60% of us own the IAM space, and we have been having all these secrets exposing in GitHub or in Slack or wherever you want it, so I guess it's been our fault all this years. Security has owned this, and it's been like it's keeping me with a job, and I'm blaming the devs, I'm blaming engineers, the enterprise people again for creating this problem. But hey, it's not me. It wasn't me. I don't own it, but apparently I do.
You, Mario.
So I've made this interesting connection about the identity and something that's more fundamental that we all also recognize as a problem, but isn't necessarily our problem, security's problem. So think about what identity is, and actually, let's think about the problem of asset management for a moment. Asset management is a well-known problem across many organizations. No one feels like their asset management is good enough, right? Okay, but consider like one of the first things that we do in asset management is an inventory. What is it that we're actually inventorying? What is it that we're actually capturing in our inventory? Well, I would argue the fundamental variable that we're collecting in our inventory is a identity. Okay.
Okay.
What makes one item in the inventory different than another item in the inventory? It's a unique identity.
Okay.
So identity and asset management and inventorying are really kind of three sides of the same coin. Anyway, so the question is, who owns asset management? Who owns inventory? That's not security typically, or shouldn't be.
I totally agree. Yeah, the CMDB and all of that. Yeah.
So then, is identity management a security thing too? And I would argue no, it shouldn't be. We are a recipient or we're a beneficiary of a good identity management program. We shouldn't be the owners of it.
Yeah.
And I'll add one more twist to that. So I was hosting a CISO dinner last week, and I asked a question to our colleagues. Does a credential belong in IAM? When you think of IAM, are you thinking also credentials? Is credentials part of that IAM? And to me, credentials are not IAM. It's not. Right? It's one way of you authenticate an identity, authenticates themselves using some sort of credential potentially, but that is not IAM, in my opinion. And there were some folks who felt really, no, actually credentials are IAM. And so go ahead.
I would
Sunil.
disagree. I think credentials are part of identity management. They're not necessarily part of access management.
Yeah. Okay. So to bring it back to the survey, I think why this is resonating with us or not resonating well with us with the 60% and higher is maybe this Hitch Partners, please don't take it the wrong way, but maybe the question was a little not, it could be interpreted. It was, for different. And so I think that's what's happening here.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. And that always plagues our industry. People are, benchmarking and they don't define the numerator really well, I mean, the classic was what percentage of IT spend is your security spend? And what does IT spend even mean? It's not a gap measure, right? And everybody's just throwing out random data. So, yeah, no fault of Hitch Partners at all. What are you going to do? And they probably didn't think that was really the most important part of their survey, but we certainly picked up on it. Shifting gears, I wanted to talk about what I'm calling dangling S3 buckets. In particular, it's a threat intel report out of Watchtower Labs. What they basically found was that all these AWS S3 bucket names, which by default are in, I think it's s3.amazonaws.com, that as people either replace them or abandon them or finally migrate to in-house naming convention, that they're abandoned out there and they registered some of them and saw, boom, what do you know? A bunch of people are still trying to call out to them. Let's talk to them and see what they want. And they want configuration data and updates and all this other stuff, and we could feed them bad data and wreak havoc. The theme here to me is about dangling records of different types. Are you guys surprised by this revelation? And is this something that you've seen as a common risk in the risk register at the orgs that you've been at?
Where it gets really dangerous, and what this report talked about was when they talk about progressively, like how deeply entrenched this is in our internet ecosystem. Okay, not just like these small little things, but like at some pretty foundational levels, how much people rely upon a pointer to a DNS name that can easily be hijacked, like really easily be hijacked when it gets abandoned. And so you have these pointers to software updates or to code that can just basically execute as soon as anyone just downloads it. And it's just it's pretty bad. And it's not just AWS buckets; it's any cloud bucket. So you could point to Azure, Cloud App, or what it was in a cloudapp.azure.com or whatever else it is. There's all these storage buckets for which, as soon as it's abandoned, someone can just basically pick it up and register it for themselves and use it to basically serve whatever content anyone's asking for. And so this particular blog just pointed out as it got deeper and deeper into the inside, the interior of the internet, so to speak, and the foundational elements of like what enables us to build software, for example, like a lot of the common tools that people use to build software, like Gradle, okay, is exposed to this. And so if a common tool like Gradle which is used for building software in a lot of places, is exposed to this, then you have instant, remote code execution on lots of really sensitive systems, right? So anyway, fortunately, they reported they've sinkholed all these different things proactively. But I think it also points to really a practice that I don't know why we haven't enforced this much more, which is, why are we pointing to domains that are not ours, that we don't control, that someone can easily hijack?
Oh, I see.
Like if we're building software, and we in our software we point to an AWS bucket that is where the DNS name is, go hijack me when I forget this bucket.s3.aws, Amazon AWS.com. Like, we're just setting ourselves up for failure.
I know.
Why would you do that?
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, like, this is a very related note. So policies, believe it or not. Okay. So first of all, again, nobody agrees on anything in security. Policies, a lot of people think policy means those stupid statements you could shelve away saying like, thou shalt have a domain naming system or that kind of stuff. To me, policies should be pretty actionable and tactical and measurable. One of the ones that I had, and I'm not going to say everyone agreed with this, I think I was kind of a weirdo unicorn in this, but I had a DNS policy as part of security policy. And among other things, there were two things in there. And one was, we shall not have things that end in our top level domain / domains that resolve to IPs we don't control. And the other was, we will not have the opposite. We will not allow other people to have domain names that would point to IPs we control. Not allow in as much as we have control of it. Like in a commercial venture, we wouldn't agree with that design, right? And it was for a few reasons. I mean, one of them was, we've seen this all the time. Your company, somebody in marketing wants to work with a new cloud provider or whatever it may be, a new CMS, and they just throw in a DNS name, and then you get some scan, and it's saying it's full of WordPress vulnerability. We don't even use WordPress. What the hell? Oh, yeah, it's a third party. Some fly-by-night stood it up, and we point our something.domain.com to it. And you get tired of, when you're explaining you're losing, you get tired of having to answer to everybody like, oh, that's not ours, that's not ours, that's not ours. So we just said we can't do it. And, my ex-employer had a lot of people that were a little bit disgruntled with me at different times because of the UX, and our customer-facing apps would go to a different domain. But I did it on purpose to say, like, you're leaving here. What happens from this point forward is not mine. Don't bother me about it. And the other was, the kind of the opposite of that. We'd get scanned by stuff if we had it going backwards. What this is telling me is that, and this isn't a DNS thing anymore, to Sunil's point, maybe part of AppSec should be that all of the resources that are included in an app should be things that you own and that you shouldn't be doing call outs to third parties. Now think about JavaScript dependencies. That ship is long left the port, right? I mean, all of our sites and analytics and all of that. So, well, those could suffer from this too and go to S3 buckets that are deprecated. You have no control over it. Is this an impossible task?
If you as the owner of that is because you're associated with that S3, you being the customer, you have an account, AWS, and the S3 still, even though it doesn't, you might not be using it anymore, still associated with you. And if you leave it open, apparently you get charged for it every time somebody's accessing it from the public internet. All right, so forget about the security implications, folks, okay? Now, if you want to care about money and the bottom line of your business, you're paying AWS millions of dollars for things that are no longer yours, or not that are no longer, you should even be using it. I heard that AWS changed that practice recently, but it's not just security, it's just poor practice. And Sunil, I know that you were going to say something. So,
the cost of the buckets is why people abandon them, right? They don't why keep paying for them, which is why you abandon them. But that's the issue is that we should plan for that abandonment anyway as a part of our design, and we don't do that when we build these apps. We assume that, well, I don't know what we assume, but I here's the way I would think I would look at it from henceforth. If you see a URL within your app, within documentation, within anything, treat it as a .ru domain. Okay, if you see Amazon AWS.com, just replace it in your mind with .ru, and you would say, "Are you comfortable with that?" And if you are, more power to you. But I would say if that's in the control of whoever that might be in Russia, you're gonna have to live with the consequences of that.
So you think that having a .ru domain is bad because it's controlled by Russia? But how do you feel about the Indian government? Because link.in is totally fine, right? I'm diverting into this TLD abuse. It drives me insane. All these country codes to get reappropriated for things, and like .io is not. There's not a country called input output.
And so is .ai, right? Just about every country. I don't even know which country owns .ai, but I'm sure someone out there knows.
Yeah, well, that's another story.
Or .tv, which is about to sink into the ocean, I think. So.
And if you're trying to defend yourself against this problem, now you're the consumer, and how do you protect yourself against these problems? And now you're talking about technology that you need to enforce. Maybe most of us have it, maybe not, but you're going to have to update maybe your proxy, maybe your laptop, maybe your network, and that will just do you have the proxy to do that, to block the URL, and where do you get that list? Now you can get that list, sure. Maybe most often they're open source lists, but I think if they get long term stale, then it's easy to capture them in open source. If not, if you need to have more be more proactive about it, you want them within a day, and that you have to pay money for, and most companies don't have that. They're not paying that service. So this is just ugly all around. It's just, as Sunil said, it's bad practice, man. It's bad for everyone.
The perspective here is simply, if anyone's doing a security review, if there's even, and some of this is easily searchable through tools like SumGrep and SaaS tools, just look for any place where it's calling out to an S3 bucket with Amazon AWS.com or the equivalent for Azure or whatever else it is, and just say, hey, does it need to be that, right? And if it is going to be that for some reason, then you put in the necessary countermeasures with signatures and other things to ensure that whatever gets delivered is actually authentic.
Yeah, DBOM, right? You're making a domain bill of materials now that we're going to have to ship with all this stuff. Sounds awful. Yeah. All right. Switching gears again, Biden executive order. We talked about this one last time. And Sunil, you mentioned you want to talk about this again. You learned a little bit more about this, and or just time has passed. What caught your eye?
Yeah, so again, I mentioned last time, I was a little bit surprised that it wasn't immediately rescinded because there were a lot of other things that the Trump administration rescinded, like the AI executive order and such. But for whatever reason, again, the cybersecurity executive order has not been rescinded, and this leads to a couple interesting potential conclusions. And one word that I heard in the street is that the Trump administration did have a chance to weigh in on the executive order before it went out. Okay, because it was released pretty close to his inauguration, if you recall. But there's also some other interesting things that I can see why the Trump administration would strongly support elements of this executive order. And the one thing that actually did catch my eye was having age verification, having mechanisms that enable essentially anonymous age verification. And you can see why it's anonymous because, porn's the number one use case, I'm sure, for just about any technology out there. And you don't want to necessarily give out your identity, your full identity, but you just want some simple age verification. But there's a lot of other really interesting use cases for age verification. Social media access is one of those. And anybody who's read Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt knows, some of the things that he's brought up about the dangers of social media. But in his book, he also talks about the need for something like age verification and simple mechanisms to implement that can help us do this. And that's what I saw in the executive order. But what I also got thinking about this was, let's suppose that, and I think the technology, well, not just think, the technology is there to help us do this, to do age verification. But going back to the identity and access management conversation that we had earlier, if we can have something like this rolled out, then why couldn't we extend this in some other interesting ways? A lot of us have talked about like a driver's license for the internet. Okay. Effectively, the social media age verification is a driver's license for social media. But what if we can also use it for having a driver's license for like banking? Okay. Look, if you're going to do banking, then I need for you to essentially do the equivalent of not age verification, but something, a know your customer verification. Are you truly that person? And is there a mechanism that allows us to leverage this underlying technology that's going to be used for age verification, but for other things that we care about in security?
We have a colleague that is on that does tools. Keep me on tools for humanity, mm-hmm. And I went to a dinner, and they were showing off the how they're thinking about this, and I was afraid, man. I'm such a skeptic. I was like, no way they're gonna have this thing at their house and like this device telling them who they are and verify who they are, and no freaking way. And then as I was learning more and more about it, and how it protects the privacy, but at the same, the key is how do you identify somebody who they are and still keep it private, protect privacy? It's a really daunting problem. I don't have any money invested in them. I'm just letting you know there are some people thinking about this. And as much as I like to poo on some of these ideas, I think we're going to need to do something about this, some way of identifying ourselves on the internet. I still don't know how possible that is, but kudos to companies who are trying to solve this problem.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting is, I think what you're talking about is kind of privacy preserving identity versus like privacy preserving encryption, right? Because the idea is I want to be able to know that you're 19 without knowing anything else about you, and this is a specific use case where we've decided. I don't know. I guess if you think about the book that you mentioned, Sunil. Anxious Generation, there's some age-bound recommendations there too, right? And if people jump on that, like for example, social media not being available to anyone over 16, and who was it that just did that? Well, a country just implemented. Was that New Zealand that just?
I forget, but But the point here is that it doesn't matter that you have a certain age, but imagine now we can easily tell who are bots and who are not. So anyway, I think there's some interesting downstream benefits that we can potentially use. Let's go back again to one of the big issues that we have with it's not account stuffing, but just new account creation. Okay, I don't need to do an age verification outside of just saying, are you an actual person, right? As opposed to, are you a bot?
Yeah. Yeah, well, what I was
Yes.
going to say earlier is like age aside, if you could attribute every action, every piece of data, every information on the internet to a human, we wouldn't have cybersecurity problems. Just I'm oversimplifying somewhat, but I mean, in general, we wouldn't have a big market here, right? Because without anonymity, without the mascot suit, people behave well. Now, we'd have other problems, privacy problems.
I don't think this is a technical problem. When it's all said and done, I think this has to do with a lot of our own psychology, sociology, all these things about us as of humans. I can immediately put. I'm sorry, I'm going to put 1984, the book. Immediately conjures 1984. And if you're if you're on the religious side, oh, I'm thinking the Book of Revelations. Oh, right, the universal ID, the number of the beast. I can see this. This is so. So the problem is our society are going to be the challenge for any technical implementation. Otherwise, this would have been implemented years ago, in my opinion.
That's right.
It's there's people are just not ready for this.
Well, okay. So again, go back to why this hasn't been rescinded. The Trump administration, which we know on the religious right side, is supportive of things like NH verifications for social media. So I think this has legs, and not just legs, but I mean it's an executive order. It hasn't been rescinded, and that means that this is going to have to be put in place. Which as parents, I'm like, yay. As cybersecurity people, I'm like, what are the interesting opportunities? But let me also give you one other one that is, there's with every opportunity, there's also potential downsides, right? One of the things that we've speculated for some time is the creation of fake people. Basically, you grow people, but they're all fake. Okay, they're just fake identities, right? We've seen the whole synthetic identity fraud movement, but what if you actually had like real, not real, but fake, I'm not sure what to even call it, but fake people that are grown from beginning, like age 0, and you wait 16 years, and eventually you have real people who, anyway, you get the idea, and that's already, I'm pretty sure that's already been started by various people in the world, but imagine that at scale now.
Yeah, I think so. But I mean, privacy and security, I think we just have this tension that keeps on going here because there's a lot of people out there that if you strip the world of bots and automated things, that they would lose their business, right? I mean, the internet's kind of funded by noise and automation and bots and marketing, and so
And some of these people pay for our politicians, campaigns. It's the facts, okay? So whoever's got the big wallet makes some of these, decisions.
Look, it's true. It's true. All right. Speaking of wallets and money, this isn't quite a regular segment, but I think it's fun to talk about the cyber market in general. I mean, a lot of CISO listeners, a lot of cyber vendors, a lot of investors, everything in between. Some of these cyber stocks are popping. First, to cover on CrowdStrike, they're over $420 a share, over $100 billion market cap, which is the metric that really matters. And most importantly, they're at an all-time high. So they dealt things totally in the past, but also it says people are bullish on our sector, on cyber, not going away anytime soon.
Yeah, what I thought was also interesting, I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, which was when AI tanked, where did they all go? They went to cybersecurity, which implies a degree of stability, right? There's a reason why people go to T-bills or they go to bonds. They want more stability. So I thought it was really interesting. You go from a highly volatile market like AI, and the less volatile, more stable one is cybersecurity. That's kind of interesting. It points to a potential. Does that mean our job market is stable as well? I think we'll see, later on as to whether that's the case.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I mean, this just, when you're talking about CrowdStrike, though, and how much they've done so well, it just shows how we human beings it's just what's important today, and we forget. 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 1 month, 2 months later, we're forgetting. It's no longer in our headlines. And it's always this it's the focus is on the danger today. Our minds, our brains focus on, oh, this is really important. This is really dangerous. And then once that goes away for the next day, it will be some new dangerous thing. And then you forget about that, right? I mean, this is just the nature of who we are. Sad and glad to see cybersecurity is doing well. Don't know what's going to happen next year.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, the one that really caught my eye was Cloudflare. That thing's just been awesome. I've been a big believer in Cloudflare since the early days, and on and on. And I'm an investor in it too, just for the sake of disclosure. And so I track it, and I notice whenever it bounces, and today actually when we're recording, it's popped almost 20% on earnings. It's just blowing it out. But when I look at that one,
congratulations, Jerry.
thank you very much. No, drinks are not on me. Let's wait till we exit, right? Mark of the venture world. But when I look at that, and maybe definitely, I know Cloudflare has wanted to really rebrand itself as more cyber forward and less just a CDN, and I say that now, but especially 10, 15 years ago, now the mission's accomplished, and that's why it's making the headlines and it's being tracked in the indices about cyber and onward. But to me, Cloudflare is, I feel like I'm pumping this thing up as an investor, and so I'm feeling kind of dirty. So reverse of everything I say, world, okay? This is just my candid thoughts at this moment. To me, it's the fourth cloud service provider, right? And if you looked at all the little features that they rolled, and it's not the cyber stuff, but storage, cloud databases, all that kind of stuff, edge computing. Everybody has to go through a CDN before they get to their cloud. And so by the time you have them all captive, if you start eating away the back-end services and putting it into there, and maybe Akamai and Fastly will follow suit and do the exact same thing, right? So I think that the CSP world is going to be expanding pretty quickly, and we're going to have a lot more tools that are in our quiver.
I wonder what Oracle and IBM would have to say about that. As the fourth, as opposed to the number as opposed to the sixth.
You are always a lot more diplomatic than I am. All right, so you're goading me here, but I've heard that, and I know that Oracle, if not IBM, are supposedly cloud providers. When in air quotes, when I used the Oracle cloud, I remember specifically there was something where they had for one, oh my God, the domain names and the fully qualified names and stuff like that. It was just a nightmare. But I remember there was something where we had a hard-coded call out to some Oracle URL in one of their products. It was probably Oracle Financial or something like that. And it was ugly and weird and in an unknown domain. Okay, that's fine. But it also had a hard-coded port number on it. It was 8440. I remember that in particular. And it was breaking something. Maybe it was probably our DLP controls, right? You always have stuff like that where it's like, I don't even know how to type in a port. No, you can't put in a whitelist rule or whatever it was. So whatever, it was what it was. That's no big deal. Remember we talked about remediation agility in last episode? Right? We talked about can you make a website change? We spent my career with a change request in asking if they could just change the URL for one tenant. And they not only couldn't do it, but they were individuals kind of laying their souls bare. I'm sorry. I know this should be easy. It's awful. It's just how it is.
Was this IBM or Oracle Cloud? Which is one of these cloud?
It was Oracle, just because I don't want to unjustly crap on IBM here.
Yeah.
I have a person
I'm going to upset somebody by saying this.
You can't beat me.
I'm going to upset somebody. I know this is going to get back to me. But here's what I've heard about what's the difference between customers in IBM Cloud versus customers in Oracle Cloud?
Yes.
Any of you?
No, go.
IBM customers are in an industry that's going downhill, and that's where people go to die. Companies go to die if they're using IBM Cloud, right? So it's going to disappear. Oracle, on the other hand, is where customers are locked in and they can't get out because of the Oracle contract. So they're both kind of, persona, I wouldn't say non grata, but they're not in a good place.
For different reasons, though. It's a very valid point.
Okay,
I do remember one thing that newcomers to the industry aren't necessarily familiar with, talk about, repeating the sins of your ancestors, is predatory licensing, right? With the idea of let's make it easy for someone to use something, and then later when they make it big and they have deep pockets, we'll come back and say, oh, this is totally embedded. And Oracle that was their MO with Java right? I mean, you probably have shareholders right now going, "Yeah, Jerry, duh, that's why I invested in them. Quit complaining about it." That's the whole point. But man, it was just awful, right? And you see all these, and for every company that would, oh man, we need to rip out Java or move to open source anywhere we can, there were 10 that said, just pay the damn bill, make them go away.
Jesus, Jerry, you just got brought bad memories. Yeah, I swear to God, you just brought bad memories right now, man.
Anyone
I
new
really
to the
need a
industry,
drink.
then watch.
Yeah.
This is, you are not alone.
All right. So going back to the market for a moment, the perspective around Oracle, especially around Stargate, which by the way, Stargate, Skynet, there's such a strong connection between those two words. But that's right. Anyway, their investment into Stargate and AI, of course, it gets into this conversation around if Cloudflare were to make a move into as being the fourth or sixth, however you want to count it, CSP. I think the big move that a lot of these players are counting on is to see how AI unfolds in terms of compute requirements and applications and where and how they're going to be delivered, right? And in the context of like edge computing, a lot of this is still, the jury's still out on this, but can you do AI workloads on the edge, or do you need massive GPU farms and so on and so forth? And if you can actually run some of these AI models on the edge, so to speak, this is where I think you have a real opportunity for companies like Cloudflare, Fastly, and Akamai to really create a whole new type of ecosystem that it'd be hard to for some of the other CSPs to compete against. So anyway, we'll see where the AI market how it unfolds, especially in terms of the compute and the compute requirements that you have for these AI models.
Yeah, and it goes. I should say that the big three, they're chasing the CDNs to get parity with the CDN technology to your CloudFront and that sort of thing. So there is a competition here, and it's possible that the big three catch up and take over the CDN functionality before the CDNs can take over the CSP functionality. And you might argue that that's the harder thing to do, that the Cloudflares of the world have a harder mission to take over AWS than vice versa. So,
well, I think ultimately depends on how these apps are made, right? So one of the things that I'm bullish on is WebAssembly as a coding base to build out applications, and more applications are being built in WebAssembly, including LLM-based apps. And so if a lot of these apps can be built in WebAssembly, it actually empowers the edge computing CDNs to actually now deliver apps in a much more efficient way than we currently have today.
Oh, that's right. So right. So you push the compute from the data center to the edge and then to the client, which we know a number of really big companies who would love for you to need more computing resource out of your phone, right? Remember, the client is phone. That's the only client that's left. And when you think about the more direct native applications of AI on devices that aren't supposed to be operating in the cloud anyway, the hardware's going that way. It's going to be able to do it. So yeah, you start pushing WebAssembly down to them and letting them do the work for the cloud providers. Yeah, and maybe that gives CDNs an advantage because, sorry, I know we went on a wild tangent there, but that's good stuff, Sunil. Yeah.
Hold on to your stock, Jerry.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, you're right. WebAssembly is really cool, but I didn't even think about about the AI implications of it.
Yeah.
Hey, so speaking of the cyber market, so we talked about whether or not the job market's good or not, and we talked about stocks and that people are bullish on investing in cyber companies at least. And we talked about AI a little bit, and there's that recurring narrative about whether AI is coming for jobs, and in cyber it seems like no one's lamenting that. It's more like, please come and do these jobs that no one is doing or doing well so far. Incidentally, we're seeing some layoffs. I think it was Okta in particular cutting a bunch of the security force. Is that a pattern? Is that a trend? Is it a one-off? Is it isolated?
So it's not isolated. So the perspective being at the broader macro trend is how many jobs is AI going to replace? It'll certainly create new jobs. Yes, we all know that, but it'll also displace arguably more jobs than it will create. And that's really the big, concern across all of society here, of course. Here's the real question for our listeners, for ourselves. I read this book, Life 3.0 by Max Tegmark, and he offered this really nice analogy. Think of our jobs and our job skills as peaks on a mountain, okay, or different parts of a mountain. And what you want, and you see this water constantly rising, sort of like global warming, right, where the water is rising. And that water is AI. And over time, as it continues to rise, it inundates certain types of jobs. It displaces jobs. So there are jobs at the shore, at ground level, at sea level. There's jobs at 1,000 foot, 5,000 foot, 10,000 foot, and so on and so forth. What are the jobs at that highest peak? Because those are the jobs that will take AI some time to displace. So when we look at these security jobs, which ones are at sea level? Okay. Which ones are 1,000 foot? So I would have thought security engineering is not a sea-level job. It's something that I would hope is, because I do security engineering myself, right? But I would think that it's a, 3,000 foot, 4,000 foot sort of level, and AI is not quite there yet. But then I see all these AI tools that actually do a pretty good job of, let's say, threat modeling, okay? Or a pretty good job of pen testing, a pretty good job of finding new vulnerabilities, a pretty good job of looking at all our documents and figuring out where we have flaws in our design. I'm like, okay, that water rose a lot faster than I expected.
Yeah. First of all, Mari, don't you love Sunil? That was awesome, Sunil.
Yeah. That's why I'm a believer in Sunil's company, and I did invest in it, so I'm partial. Okay, so just for the record,
Sunil Inc.
I do want to say to Joseph Doyle and to the security engineering security Okta team, we're feeling that. We're with you. We empathize with you, and anybody out there who listens to our podcast, those are talented people. Go get them. They're available. Okay. I don't know the circumstances why they let them go in that large number. Jerry and Sunil, I'm sure we see a lot of pitches about new companies. Okay. So we get to see whether we want to invest in them, we want to advise, blah, 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 whatever. Right. So we get to see a lot of it. And I have never been so, I used to think I had a comfort level of kind of understanding what the security landscape could be in the next 2-3 years, which is an extreme, by the way. 2-3 years is a little confirmation bias on my part, I will admit. But now I can't even say that. I feel like a naked baby. Right now, I'm more confused than a platypus. I don't know what the state of security is going to be a year from now. At the rate that these AI tools are doing and what they're doing, what Sunil's saying is dead accurate, and so as a again, I've said this before. I'm looking at this space. I'm trying to relearn everything and trying to say, okay, what is it that because I'm not going to use, I'm not an individual contributor anymore, but at least I want to know what the heck's going on in the industry and at least look for some trends that are happening. I'm not the only one thinking this way. I've talked to other VCs. I've heard of a VC who has been in this space for a long time, who was a general partner for VC focusing in this space in cyber, and he's getting out. He just doesn't know what to make of it. He is completely going, I don't know what to make of it. So personally, I've not been in my my years and almost 30 years in security situation. I thought the cloud was disruptive. This is more disruptive by far.
Wow. Well, I want to play with Sunil's model. Like I'm going to try. In other words, right? So I get it, Mario. It's a little bit futile, but I love that rising water thing. I mean, look, I think the part that's already under the water, that's been underwater for years, is automation. Is what can be automated, right? So if you did the same thing every day, the same way, that was automation. That wasn't AI. I thought the SOC has been the first entry point I've seen. That's been the beachfront, and it's for a few. It's not because if you're a SOC analyst, you shouldn't worry about your job. It's because of those other 3 empty recs that are unfilled that you know about. Those are the ones that we're trying to take over here. And I think that the reason why it's a good fit for AI is because you never do the same thing twice in the SOC, right? Every single alert, oh, I'm gonna Slack that person because I know them and I trust them, and I'm not gonna Slack this person though because I think that they're an insider threat, so I'm gonna go in a different direction. Or am I going to ping the manager here, and then depending on the time zone and where they are and what subsidiary they came from. And that's where AI is pretty good, because you can give it unnormalized data sources. You don't have to say everything's in the wiki, read that. You could say, look in the wiki and the share file and read my emails and search all my documentation, and then you come up with the best path forward. So everything I've been seeing in AI for security, not everything, but most of it has been on incident response, security operation, triage, that sort of thing. And I think there's a lot of fruit there. I hadn't thought about what Sunil was saying, security engineering. And when you first said that, Sunil, I'm thinking like, oh, it's going to deploy the Zscaler config. And that's not what you're saying. You're saying like reviewing architecture, configuring the tools, figuring out where the blind spots are. Where I'm business-wise, a personal plug here for my company, I think the second line, the risk management, is just your fertile ground for AI. And the tough part there is, like, if automation is, you'll know what you do every single day, now let's automate it. And if AI and SOC operations is, you know the problem set really well, and then you pursue it in different ways, so we can learn about that. I think risk management is the Wild West. Like, nobody even defines it. Oh, forget about it. TPRM, I mean, if you automated that, the world would end, because it's just awful. It's a waste of time.
Exactly.
I can AI that really well. Shut it all down. Boom, done. Lose a thing. But I think risk management, like, how do you think about risk? How do you think about threat modeling and all that stuff?
I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but and this is not my original thought. Okay, so it's not my original thought. But if you look at blue collar yes, you look at blue collar jobs, and specifically in the manufacturing industry in the United States or in more established Western countries. But let's say it's just the United States. Politicians continue to blame, oh, we're exporting all these jobs to China, to Mexico, Canada, whatever, right? We keep saying we're exporting all of it. Here, folks, here's what people are saying. It's automation. Robots are doing a lot of the jobs that blue collar workers were doing even 20, 30 years ago, and they're never going to come back. Now, you'll be some money oversight over them, but you don't need to hire hundreds and hundreds of people. The same people who have made this argument are saying this is what's happening to white collar jobs, and it's coming for engineering jobs. Yeah. I know that sounds negative, like I said, Debbie Downer, but maybe that's where we're going.
So another interesting book, I read a lot of books for those who don't know, but folks are probably familiar with this book called Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. And one of the key takeaways from it is 10,000 hours of practice and you become a prodigy. But what's also interesting, there's another book called Range by David Epstein. And it serves as a counter, actually, to Outliers, this perspective that most of us don't get the opportunity to get 10,000 hours of practice, and therefore, what do we do in life? There are definitely lots of successful people who don't get those 10,000 hours. Well, the counter is essentially this. If you can do something for 10,000 hours to become a prodigy, then a computer can easily replace you. What's not easy to replace is somebody who has range. And what does that mean? It's somebody who can connect the dots across many disciplines, many multidisciplinary sort of things. And and I say this with a grain of salt. So for a while, AI couldn't replace that. I'm starting to see AI do a little bit of that now, where it seems multidisciplinary, but not quite exactly as much as I'd like to see it. But anyway, the point is that the skills that are at the top of the mountain are those that are very human-oriented, but also very range-oriented, things that cover a multidisciplinary view. I would argue risk management is one of those it requires, to do risk management properly, you need to have range.
Yes.
To do cybersecurity properly as well, you need to have range.
Yeah. When we're talking about this, I can't help but think about this. There's kind of this tint to the whole conversation about job preservation. It'd be bad if people lost their job, and therefore should people be worried about losing their job? But look, if the cost is solving cybersecurity, isn't that what we're supposed to be here for, right? Aren't we supposed to love working ourselves out of a job? It's tough. I mean, like, we're all selfish at heart at the end of the day, and especially people just starting out their careers. They need some kind of job preservation, but we need to be careful because it's also possible, if you play it out, that we do a bad job at security collectively to preserve our jobs, and I don't think people do it on purpose. But I definitely see a lot of awful, stupid security practices all the time that are just propped up. I call it the proxy. I mean, I have some friends who are going to pick on this one, but I used to call it the proxy admins labor unit number 34. Union.
Wait a minute. If Hitch Partners survey is accurate, and it's more than 60% of us own IAM, we're the reason all these security incidents have happened. So you're right, Jerry. We're the ones messing it up and keeping ourselves in the job.
Well, I'm gonna use that for the best segue of the week. So, TLS inspection. I had an esteemed peer surveying a group and asking about TLS inspection and kind of trying to say, okay, CISO security leaders, security practitioners, how many of you care about TLS inspection? And the funniest part is I'm helping a company interview CISO candidates, and one of my screening questions was, if you can't do TLS inspection, what are some other alternative methods? And I wanted them to talk about like just simple DNS filtering and carte blanche block listing and all of that. But the way he phrased the question was really interesting. It was kind of like, is there anybody out there not doing TLS inspection, not breaking TLS? Which was kind of I think if you're not, and you might get shamed a little and not want to speak up. So I'm full of shame. So I just jumped out and said, oh, I'm not doing it. I'll never do it. I think it's the dumbest thing ever. And then I got into articulating my viewpoint on it. And it goes right back to the proxy workers labor union number 557. It's the TLS inspectors labor union 557, which, by the way, it's in the proxy servers. My general take was you can always defeat TLS inspection, and therefore any adversary worth their salt, you're not seeing their data. But more importantly, you're employing a bunch of people to look through the data that you could decrypt.
Totally.
And it's a waste of time and look at the wrong thing.
Totally.
You agree? Okay, I got Mario on board.
No. I think so Sunil, I don't know where you're going to go with this but I'm going to tell you right now.
It's time to get adversarial.
I did adversarial. Here we go. I try to follow this jihad, technical jihad back in the 2000s. First of all, let's be really honest. You're going to tell me, you companies are going to tell me, what data you have? Anywhere, everywhere, and you know what type of data we actually have in our environment? You'll go to your Google Drive, you're going to tell me exactly what that is, and then, okay, fine, you know what the data is everywhere? Okay, so because you know all the data, you'll be able to do a TLS inspection. Well, the reality is we don't know what we have. Like in Google Drives, for example, if people are uploading it, you have no idea. So Neil, again, I think maybe there's something you can argue against that. I think the benefits
I like how we assume Sunil is like.
I think I know where Sunil. I already know what he's going to end up doing. But I think the negative on this, you become a choke point to see all that data. Oh my goodness, an attacker will love to see it. Love to see some of that data. You become like the honeypot of all times. TLS inspection sucks, folks. It's great. Nobody's going to make sense of that. You get a bunch of false positives, and your IR team is going to be exhausted because they think like, "Oh my goodness, they're stealing our data. What is this? Oh, it's nothing." That's what happens every second. Sunil?
So we did TLS inspection at scale at a former employer, and the best way to describe the architecture is Rube Goldberg. So.
Yeah.
But it got it to work, and there was value.
What to work? What's the objective? To decrypt the data, or to stop cybersecurity attacks?
To decrypt the data to be able to then subsequently see what's happening on the network. The reality is, yes, if you can see if the network weren't dark, then you could do a lot of interesting things with it. Okay, that said. I also recognize where the world's going, TLS 1.3, perfect forward secrecy, all the things that make the network great again from a security standpoint, from a user security standpoint. So I would say I've reinterpreted what we mean by TLS inspection. I think TLS inspection is great, and we can still do it, and there's a lot of value in it. But the type of inspection that we're doing is the headers, right? The things that you can actually see. So if you're familiar with JA4, there's a lot of really interesting things you can do with that just to see what's the nature of the traffic and who's originating this traffic, or what. Anyway, there's ways to fingerprint TLS traffic itself. And there's actually a lot of value in just that alone.
But you don't need to decrypt You don't need to do a TLS inspection to look at the header, right? Isn't it? The header
you don't need
should
to
be
right. So I'm playing on the word inspection to say, well, I wasn't meaning decryption. I was just looking at the headers.
Touche. That's really good. That's good. And I would agree with you. Like you know.
Yeah, who's that? I don't see the word decryption in there.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm speaking out of school again here, but was it TLS 1.3 maybe, where they're doing SNI header encryption. So that was metadata. You used to be able to see no matter what's the name of the site, what's the host, and a certificate name in particular. And now that is I just say, one of the things I said in this whole soliloquy was, whenever CISOs are not railing about trying to decrypt TLS and how important it is, we're busy trying to make it impossible to decrypt TLS. Right, that's the other 70% of our job. And you look at all of the major technology breakthroughs. I mean, look, quantum safe encryption, all this kind of stuff. Google protecting dissidents in oppressive regimes, that sort of thing. It all has to be where you can't break encryption.
Yeah, but this is not about breaking encryption at all. Like and when I talk about the inspecting the headers, I mean, with SNI it's fine too. We don't have to. I don't necessarily need to see the host name and some of the header information. But what you can do with tools like JA4 is just see the order of where some of these headers come in, and the order. And the order is hard to manipulate as an attacker, which is great for us, right? And so because of that, it enables us to essentially understand, to get just enough data to say, you know what, this communications requires additional investigation. Now, the communications I can't break, but guess what? If I own the endpoint, right, that's game over, right? So the reality is we should, for the things that matter, we should own the endpoint. And the network traffic that looks suspect is just a pointer to say, go look at this endpoint.
I don't need to look at the contents of your conversation. I want to know that you call some number and you call it at this time, and how often are you calling it? Okay, the metadata, that is what I like. That's what we should be focusing on. I think, Sunil, maybe that's what you're saying. Mm-hmm. Which, by the way, I thought there was going to be more adversarial on this topic. Seems like we're all on board. It's not I think you're right. TLS inspection is kind of a play on word here. I think you got me on that.
Yeah, and you want to be contrarian. I mean, once again, first I was burning down IAM earlier in the show, and now if you burn down SSL decryption, think about all the hardware savings. Think about all the labor savings and all of that, and the distractions of people wading through benign data over and over again, and so on. All right, last topic we wanted to talk about today. This is a kind of a recurring theme, it seems, with SOC 2 audits, and are they important? Are they good enough? Do you still want to ask more questions? I had a question from someone that I relayed on, which was, does the auditor name matter? Right, because the question always comes up, it's like, use Big Four when the name's worth the extra premium, and if it doesn't matter, then you use the boutiques or the lowest price if it's not something that's really important to you. And so I asked that, and I kind of went in with the bias towards no. I thought people either cared about a SOC 2, and then the minute they got it, they ticked the box and didn't even know what it meant, and as long as it wasn't qualified, that was as much as they inspected. And if they really cared about a particular threat vector or whatever, then the SOC 2 was just kind of, who cares? I need to ask you these questions. I need to talk to you. Ooh, I need to get Mario on the phone, right? That's how we met. Probably 10 plus years ago, we were going to buy something from you, and the SOC 2 didn't cut it, and we got you on the phone, and then 20 minutes later I said, they're good to go. Let's just use them. So that's what I thought. But what people were saying is that the auditor name matters. And that they dig deeper if it's a no-name auditor. Or I saw somebody just today actually update on the thread and say that they've had a customer who forced them to change auditors to a Big Four auditor. Would you guys have expected that?
That happened to us. That happened to us.
Really?
I would, I come from one of those Big Four. And here, folks, there's a little secret, right? The folks who go out there, the doers, they're typically green. They'll have a manager doing oversight, but a lot of these guys, they're just reading a playbook and they don't really understand the nuances of newer technologies. In green, I mean the consultants who are actually doing the actual audit for this stuff. What I think it's important is you want to go to a company that understands the technical. If you're on the edge of technology, I may not suggest you go with the Big Four. You may want to go with more boutique shop that's more tailored to understanding the newer nuances of technology. And so we used those boutique shops at my other shop for a while, for years, but it was companies, I'm not calling you out, it wasn't you, Jerry, and it wasn't you, Sunil, but larger companies who would say, but I don't know who this company is. I need one of the Big Fours, right? And I'm not going to blame it on them. No, I'm not doing that. But it is really, it's a lot of, honestly, it's a lot of, especially not SOC 2 type 2. What caught my eye was it's the SOC 1 type 2 that becomes the bigger issue. And so the SOC 1 is the cousin of SOC 2 type 2. And one is around financial reporting. So the SOC 1 is more associated if your tool is being used for financial reporting for a public company, they want to see a SOC 1 type 2. And if that's the case, they want to see a Big Four. And that's where the hook happens.
Yep. Okay. Yeah.
I don't think a SOC 2 is worth the paper it's written on. So in some respects, I don't really care who the auditor is personally. And I've been audited by a Big Four, and I've been audited by a no-name auditor. And actually, in some respects, I think, your mileage may vary. Everyone's mileage varies with these auditors as well. I don't think I would necessarily say that the Big Four audit was of any higher quality than the smaller one. So anyway, take that for what it's worth, which is that I think SOC 2s are not what they're worth.
I would agree with you more. Yeah. And here's something that's pretty funny. We were talking about credentialing last time and about CISOs and about, I think I drew the analogy where I want my CFO to have been a CPA or to have done rudimentary accounting at one point in their career, and I want CISO to have messed around with access control lists at some point in their career and all of that. Meanwhile, and people I think have said things like this, right? The poor Equifax CISO, she was absolutely lambasted at the time of the breach because she had a music degree, and people went right after that and the credentials and whatnot.
It was terrible. Yeah.
You remember? Yeah. It was. People are quick to go after all that. How is the entire planet okay with CPAs doing all the security auditing? The SOC 2 standards from the American Institute of CPAs. I'm the first person to ever bring that up. That's totally okay.
Yeah.
How? I mean, what does that have to do with cybersecurity? Would you hire CPAs and only CPAs to secure your life in general or in your cyber program?
I mean, that just comes from a historical perspective.
Don't hire me to run your CFO, to run your books. I'll tell you that much.
All I'm going to say is cyber risk quantification. That's why we need CPAs.
I would rather,
and why we don't.
The SOC 2 is just a checkbox. What I want to see is the red team report. And I want to see a red team report done by your team potentially, or somebody who's reputable, who's actually done a really deep analysis. And if I'm going to use software that you're selling me or a SaaS application, I want to understand about your CI/CD. Nobody ever shows me CI/CD. I want to know the badness of CI/CD.
Oh, they're going to give you an S-bomb. Mario, they can give you S-bomb. Go away. You're done. You got the S-bomb. No. Yeah,
I poo on that, man. Come on.
It's not worth the paper it's printed on. All right, guys. This has been fun as always. We really covered a lot of material today. So that's been great. Thanks much. I'm looking forward to the next one already. And hopefully things finally get boring so we don't have so many rabbit holes to go down.